Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to the channel. It's Cynicalex, and today we're going to look at the X-Force uniform for Nightcrawler and basically decide whether or not it actually improved the character enough to warrant a purchase. There's also some interesting considerations to make, not only for PvE content in World Boss, but also Shadowland, and I'll make that a little bit clearer as we get further along. Additionally, I do want to kind of rate all three of the X-Force uniforms at the end of the video, because I feel as though I haven't done a clear enough rating for both Wolverine and Deadpool. I've kind of just explained everything about the uniforms and how they work and what needs to be, fixed or what doesn't work, but I didn't give a clear consensus on whether or not you should purchase them. So I'll do that because I know the uniform sale is almost up. But first we're doing, and the majority of the time we're going to be focusing on Nightcrawler. Now unfortunately, Nightcrawler didn't get any reworks as part of his uniform introduction, which sometimes happens, especially for characters who are severely underutilized, and I'm sure Netmarble has the stats on how often he's used. I mean, I don't even have the greatest build for him. I don't even have the uniform mythic. I don't even have his gears ranked up past 20, and I'm already in the top 500. So that tells me there's just very few players who are investing in Nightcrawler because he's probably not giving them the returns that they want. I mean, this build is pretty bad. And I know Nightcrawler is a fan favorite for a lot of players. It's just that he's probably so bad in their eyes that even as, their favorite character, he's not worth building up. But unfortunately, all of the reworks come from the uniform. So not only does he get skill changes to the majority of his skills, I think it's 5 or 6, he also gets his passive changed. Into the Shadow, we talked about this in a previous video. It was bad. It was when he was dodging, which doesn't make any sense because 3 of his skills with his base uniform are full iframes, and 2 of them are basically 75% iframes. So he's iframing for like 90% of the time that he's in play. So he's never going to dodge, so that Into the Shadow passive is never going to proc unless you intentionally stop to take damage and to risk taking damage just to dodge. So now instead the Into the passive triggers when you attack. So it's a much more easy activation rate to do, and you get a better buff as well. So it's just better overall. But in doing so, they've altered the character, I would say, a bit. I wouldn't say they've altered him drastically like Winter Soldier. I wouldn't say that the alteration is very small like Emma Frost, but it's a considerable alteration. They actually removed the iframe entirely from his 3rd skill, and they opted to instead give him a guard hit, a 6 guard hit for 4 seconds, so you definitely want to level up Fencing Master. They've added a lot of swords being thrown to both his 2nd and 3rd skills, which is quite cool. So they now apply bleed as well, so that bleed can counter elasticity. For those of you wondering what elasticity is, check Mr. Fantastic's tier 2, I believe, passive, or his regular tier 1 passive to know, or check Kamala Khan's passive as well. But otherwise, he remains a character with lots of iframes. He still has a full iframe on his 2nd skill. He still has a full iframe on his 4th skill with some gaps. And then he has a full iframe on his 5th skill. He still has the clones. They're still targetable, except now instead of being 10% of the stats, they're 20%. They really tried their best to not make Nightcrawler overpowered, which is so disappointing because they could have made that, 50%, and it still wouldn't have mattered. It still wouldn't have pushed the character to OP status. But he has his uses. So first I'm going to take him into some PvE action in World Boss so you can see something kind of curious. I was testing it out level 30. Now normally I'm going to use this team because it's insane DPS. It's 105% increased damage to villains plus 50% because he has the leadership tag. And we're going to be using Anti-Venom as the only striker. Now normally for most characters their 5th skill deals the most damage. But for some characters that isn't the case because their 5th skill either has some other utility or their 5th skill has bad targeting. In the case of Nightcrawler, it's the 2nd one. His 5th skill targeting sucks ass. It's just really bad, and he has this this is the 5th skill. He has this long ass gap where he just roars in the air and then he slashes down, and it's just trash. I noticed it when I was playing him in Shadowland. It's really garbage. The skills that don't have garbage damage are 2 and 3. 2 and 3 actually have really nice damage, so it's actually an interesting situation. It's kind of like Arachnite. If you guys remember Arachnite when he came out, there were some videos of him just using 1 and 2 over and over again to iframe and beat much higher Shadowland bosses that he otherwise couldn't do because he was only at like 3 stars or 4 stars. This was way before Shadowland got buffed, of course. not recently. It's kind of like that, and I think it's interesting and it's a bit more fun to play Nightcrawler this way because he's constantly throwing swords around. You have the second skill, iframe, to hide behind. You have the fourth skill, iframe, to hide behind. You can use the fourth skill until he throws out that blue kind of wave. And then you have the first skill. The first skill has a very short iframe at the end, but the majority of the first skill's attack is non-iframe, so you only want to use the first skill after you've done the third skill. Now you're noticing I'm taking damage, which is probably not something you're used to seeing with Nightcrawler. This rotation gives you more damage, but the trade-off for the more damage, or the trade-off for having more damage, did you do it again, is that you have less survivability. So if you get your guard hit taken off too quickly, you can definitely take damage because the lack of iframe on 3 leaves you exposed, and the iframe gap on 4 leaves you exposed as well. So you can definitely, oh, I gotta switch there. You can definitely play it safe with Nightcrawler and do his 5th skill, but if you want maximum, if you're the type of player that wants maximum damage output, then you definitely want, I wanted those heals. You definitely want those heals. You definitely want to use his second and third skill more actively, and maybe don't prioritize the 5th skill as much, which is weird to say. It's definitely not what we're used to doing in Marvel Future Fight for most characters, but I find that it does work for Nightcrawler. I'm actually taking more damage here than I usually do, and then my joystick gets stuck, so I'm running against the wall. But this method I found was quite a bit. I would say at least like 10 to 15 seconds ahead of the rotation that I was using that prioritized the 5th skill, which is quite a bit for someone like Nightcrawler who has such low damage. Any bump to his damage is helpful, so if this helps you out, let me know in the comments down below if it helps you, clear a higher stage or get to a higher stage in Shadowland. But I think Shadowland is actually where, the new Shadowland is actually where Nightcrawler's uniform will shine the most. And it's not to say that this uniform is a must-buy specifically for Shadowland, but when you look at it from the view of Shadowland, I'm actually going to cancel out of here. We can beat this stage, which is not bad. He's not even using any strikers besides Anti-Venom. It's actually not bad. It's not great, but he's kind of like Phantom X, I guess, without the all defense down. But now if you look at Nightcrawler again from the scope of Shadowland, you see a different type of character. So he's got the iframes, cool. The summons add additional damage, which is nice, but then we got a 1-second stun on his first skill. We've got bleed on his second skill. We've got bleed and guard hit on his third skill. We've got a 1-second stun plus 4 seconds of fear on his 4th skill, and then his 5th skill has 2 seconds of stun. So basically what I'm saying is he has insane amounts of CC. He's kind of like a CC or crowd control monster, kind of like the spiders, kind of like those characters who just keep piling on crowd control, like old Ronin, where you would just do stun and then fear and then bind and then stun and then fear, and you basically just chain those. And because of that, I think Nightcrawler is a useful character for, like the 40 to 50 stage range, possibly 60 if you build him up enough to where he can solo by himself, and you can get enough of a stat boost from having his uniform built up that his attack stat can go high enough that he'll be able to clear within 3 minutes, and he'll just be beating down the opponent for the majority of the time. I'm showing you guys some clips of the Shadowland kind of stages that I tried to do with Nightcrawler. I ended up waiting too long to use him, and so I couldn't actually get a solo out of him, but he came pretty close on certain stages, approaching 60, which is actually not so bad. And it's interesting that this new Shadowland has breathed life into characters that otherwise I would just say totally skip this uniform. I would still say skip this uniform if you're not going to use Nightcrawler. If you don't use him now, you're probably not going to use him later. And if I wasn't making this video, I probably would have skipped this uniform too. However, if you like his playstyle, if you need more speed characters for Shadowland that can lock down stages and go past 30, keep in mind he's also available for level 70, gear 25. He could be not that you want to spend the tier 3 materials, but he may be a useful outlet for your feathers if you don't have other uniforms or other mutants to make or build up, and so you can use those Mcron shards and those feathers to build him up while you're kind of leaving yourself below the cap of 3,000. And that's just a thought. It's not the obviously best way of purchasing a uniform. I'm spending 1,000 crystals so that I have a place to spend my feathers, but it is an option. But honestly, I can't sell this uniform very highly to you because I just don't think it does enough for the character. It's honestly probably like a 6 out of 10. as a uniform. It definitely could have done more for the character. It definitely could have buffed him a lot more. And while it's like a 10 out of 10 for Nightcrawler, compared to other uniforms and other reworks, and compared to the very, very top-heavy speed class, it's like a 6 out of 10. It can't really be any better than that, unfortunately. As far as Wolverine and Deadpool's uniforms go, so there's been a bit more discussion since I brought the heel kind of situation to light. I've had a few people contact me saying that they think it's a bug. I've had more people saying it must be a bug and it has to be fixed, and Netmarble, you can't do this to my Deadpool. I don't really know if it's a bug or not. I should have probably made that a bit more clear in the video, that I wasn't quite sure. I mean, maybe I sounded sure that it was an intended consequence, but it seems intentional, because they would have to go out of their way to change it, because there's no reason that it would change just because they gave him a new uniform. You know, there's no reason the passive would change. I mean, Wolverine's had 3 uniforms, guys. It's never changed. So it just seemed bizarre to me that it would suddenly change for Deadpool, even though it's never changed for any other character that has a heal. It never changed for Gwenpool with her heal. I checked. And so that's why I thought it was an intended consequence, and that's why I made it sound like it was. Now, if it is a bug, then it's a bug, and it gets fixed. Okay, cool, whatever. I think whether it gets fixed or not, whether it's a bug or not, you should buy this uniform. It's a very, very good uniform for Deadpool. He is the #1 character in the game now with this uniform, and I'll say that now, you know, calling on whoever wants to challenge me. And I basically say that because not only does the uniform buff his base stats, which I've said are super low for speed type, I mean, as a speed type, not only does it give him extra HP, not only does it add extra hits to his skill, but it also gives him the all defense down, which makes him an even better striker than before. He was almost always used as a striker for high-end kills, even for physical or even for like energy bosses like Ebony and stuff like that, because he could apply his cool finale passive, and that 10 seconds of 50% all defense was wild and super effective to help other characters like Psylocke or Scarlet Witch push to even higher stages. It stacks with their own all defense down, etc. Now he's even more likely, because he has 2 out of 5 skills that deal all defense down, so he's even more likely to apply that as a striker. So I think it's basically no question. If you have Deadpool at tier 3, it's a must buy. If you have him at tier 2 and you intend to tier 3 him, it's a must buy. Just basically, it's pretty close to kind of the Winter Soldier level. Not that he was weak, but just that he's so damn strong. Finally, for Wolverine, I think it's a bit more kind of questionable. If you already have the previous uniform or the previous 2 uniforms Mythic, and you're not going to tier 3 Wolverine, you may want to skip it. You may want to wait until they hopefully fix or buff Counter Slash. I think if they changed Counter Slash to activate all the time, this uniform would be a must buy, because it would make Wolverine a lot more consistent. It would make his damage a lot more burst potential, and it would just, you know, jack him up a lot. It's nice that they added both of the different effects, but unfortunately with 2 skills that are basically unused, they destroyed his 3rd skill. Basically, they took away the damage from it. I can't really give you a strong recommendation for this. I would say it's kind of midway. It's about a 7 out of 10. It's a bit better than Nightcrawler's, but it's still not like a 9 or a 10 out of 10 where I have to recommend it to you, like a Deadpool, like a Winter Soldier, and like some of these other uniforms that we've gotten recently for characters like, I don't know, Luna Snows or Sharon Rogers, stuff like that. So that is the basis, that is the kind of breakdown for Nightcrawler, and then a little side piece on Wolverine and Deadpool. That more or less concludes my X-Force uniform coverage. I will be doing more videos on the characters specifically, but not that much more on the uniforms, unless you guys want to see more and specifically ask me what you want to see about it. In the meantime, subscribe if you enjoy the content, and of course, if you like what you see, I hope to see you again tomorrow. Take care.